There exists a silent presence within each of us, an awareness that transcends thought, form, and the narratives we carry. This presence is the essence of life itself, untouched by time, beyond identity, and free from the burdens of the mind. It is in sensing this presence within ourselves that we become capable of recognizing it in another. When we meet another human being, the mind instantly constructs a conceptual framework around them, perceives a name, a history, a role, an expectation. We categorize, judge, compare, and evaluate, believing we are seeing the person. But what we perceive in such moments is merely the surface, the shifting, ever-changing appearance of form. True recognition, however, does not arise from the mind. It arises from stillness. There are moments, often brief yet profound, when we encounter another not through the lens of thought, but through the direct knowing of presence. It may happen in a moment of deep silence, in a gaze exchanged without expectation, in a shared experience of awe, or in the quiet peace of simply being together without the need for words. In these moments, something is sensed beyond the person's story, beyond their body, beyond their personality. It is life meeting life, consciousness recognizing itself. To sense consciousness in another is not to grasp at it or try to define it, for it is not something that can be contained by thought. Rather, it is an openness, a receptivity, a quiet allowing. It is the absence of the usual mental noise that separates us from direct experience. In this openness, there is no agenda, no desire to impress, no need to assert oneself. There is only presence. When we are deeply present, we begin to notice a shift in the way we relate to others. Instead of engaging with the conditioned mind, the patterns, reactions, and defenses that arise from past experiences, we begin to sense the unchanging essence beneath. This does not mean ignoring the external personality or its expressions, but rather perceiving with a deeper awareness. Often, when two people interact, there is an unconscious exchange of thought patterns. One person's emotions trigger a response in the other, and this dance of reactivity creates a cycle of identification with form. But when one person is deeply present, something remarkable happens. The habitual cycle is interrupted. A space opens up. A moment of stillness arises. In that space, the possibility of true connection emerges. Not connection based on shared opinions, backgrounds, or circumstances, but a connection that arises from beyond all of these. It is a connection that does not require agreement or similarity. It simply is. It is the recognition that, beneath all differences, there is only one life, one beingness, one consciousness expressing itself through many forms. The more we rest in presence, the more we begin to notice the subtle shifts in energy when interacting with others. There are moments when we sense openness, receptivity, and stillness in another, not necessarily because they are consciously aware of it, but because presence is their very nature, even if they do not yet recognize it. There is great beauty in these moments of silent recognition. When two people meet in presence, without the interference of mental projections, something deeper than words is exchanged. It may be felt as a quiet peace, a deep stillness, or an inexplicable sense of unity. This is not something to be forced or sought after, but something that naturally unfolds when we let go of the need to define, label, or categorize. To sense consciousness in another is also to recognize that behind all suffering, behind all pain, behind all struggle, there is still this presence, unchanged, untouched, always here. When someone is deeply identified with their pain, it can be challenging to see beyond it. The mind may resist, insisting that the suffering is who they are. But presence does not judge suffering. It simply sees it, allows it, and remains beyond it. When we hold space for another in presence, without the need to fix or change them, something profound occurs. The silent recognition of beingness itself has a transformative effect. Even if words are spoken, it is not the words that matter, it is the space in which they arise. It is the energy of presence that brings healing, not through effort, but through simply being. This is why the greatest gift we can offer another is not advice, not solutions, but presence. When we are truly present, free from judgment, expectation, or mental noise, we become a mirror in which another can see their own true nature reflected. There are moments when we may encounter someone who is so deeply present that just being in their presence feels like a homecoming. It is not because they are imparting knowledge, nor because they are doing anything in particular. It is simply because their stillness allows us to sense our own. This is the silent power of presence. In the same way, when we cultivate this depth within ourselves, we naturally invite others into the same space. It is not through words, not through explanations, but through the quiet recognition of life itself. As we deepen in presence, the boundary between self and other begins to dissolve. We no longer see others as separate entities moving through a fragmented world, but as different expressions of the same consciousness. The illusion of separateness fades, and what remains is an unshakable knowing. We are not the form, not the thoughts, not the shifting emotions. We are the awareness that perceives it all. In this realization, relationships are transformed. No longer do we relate from the ego's desire to defend, control, or seek validation. Instead, we relate from the stillness that knows no need, no lack, no conflict. There is a quiet peace in simply being with another, without expectation, without trying to become anything other than what already is. Sensing consciousness in another is not a skill to be acquired, nor is it something reserved for a select few. It is the natural state of being, accessible to all who are willing to rest in the present moment. The mind will resist, seeking to define and analyze, but presence is beyond definition, can only be experienced. And so we return to now. In this moment, beyond thought, beyond words, beyond identity, there is only this, the silent recognition of being. It is here, always here, waiting to be noticed. And in this noticing, we come home, not to a place, not to a person, but to the timeless essence that has never left. There is something beyond the words we speak, beyond the appearances we present, beyond the actions we take. There is something silent, something still, yet profoundly alive and present in each one of us. It is what animates us, what gives depth to our presence, what allows us to truly see, not just with our eyes but with our entire being. It is consciousness itself. To sense consciousness in another is not a process of the intellect. It is not a matter of observation or judgment. It is not about analyzing someone's behavior, their words, or their beliefs. To sense consciousness in another, one must first become familiar with it in oneself. Most of humanity moves through life primarily identified with thought. The mind, with its constant stream of commentary, analysis, and storytelling, dominates perception, creates an idea of who we are and who others are. It labels, compares, categorizes, and in doing so, it builds a world of separation. A world in which others are seen through the filter of concepts, not through direct experience. This is why so many interactions feel hollow, why there is a sense of distance even in the presence of others. The deeper truth remains obscured by the mental noise. But there are moments, brief yet powerful, when something else emerges. Moments when the incessant thinking quiets down, even if only for a second. In that gap, something is felt. A presence, a stillness, a connection that has nothing to do with words or thoughts. It is in those moments that one truly senses another, beyond their personality, beyond their roles, beyond the surface of their existence. This sensing is not emotional in nature, though emotions may arise alongside it. It is not based on sympathy, nor is it about understanding someone's personal story. Rather, it is an immediate recognition, wordless, effortless, of the same essence within oneself reflected in the other. When you meet someone whose mind is quiet, whose presence is rooted in stillness, you feel it. You may not know why, but there is a deep sense of peace in their presence. They do not need to say anything special. They do not need to act a certain way. Their very being radiates something beyond form. And in that presence, your own mind may begin to settle. A sense of ease arises, a recognition that there is nothing to prove, nothing to fear, nothing to defend. This is what happens when consciousness recognizes itself. And yet, this recognition is not dependent on whether the other person is aware of it. You do not need someone else to be deeply present in order to sense consciousness in them. Even if they are lost in thought, caught in identification with their mind, burdened by their personal history, the essence within them remains unchanged. It is untouched by time, by suffering, by illusion. It is always there. And when you are present, you can sense it. How does this sensing happen? Not through effort, not through will, not through trying to understand. It happens through your own stillness. When your mind is quiet, when you are not seeking, not analyzing, not labeling, something else arises. Pure perception. You no longer look at the surface. You feel what lies beneath. You can practice this in everyday encounters. The next time you meet someone, even a stranger, allow yourself to be fully present. Let go of mental commentary even for just a few moments. Listen not just to their words, but to the silence underneath. Look not just at their face, but at the aliveness in their eyes. Feel not just the energy of the situation, but the stillness that exists beneath all movement. This is not about reading people's emotions or intuiting their thoughts. It is deeper than that. It is sensing the formless presence within them, the same presence that exists in you. At first, it may be subtle. It may come and go. But as you become more rooted in your own presence, this recognition becomes more natural. You no longer see others merely as personalities, as roles, as collections of experiences and opinions. You see them as consciousness itself, temporarily expressing itself in a unique way. This shift in perception transforms relationships. When you no longer relate to others purely from the level of thought, something changes. There is less judgment, less reactivity, less need to assert yourself or defend yourself. Conversations take on a different quality, not driven by ego, but by presence. You begin to listen more deeply. You become more aware of the space between words, the pauses, the silence that holds everything together. In this space, something remarkable happens. Connection without words. You may sit with someone in silence, and yet the depth of that moment surpasses any spoken exchange. It is not an awkward silence, not a silence of absence, but a silence that is alive, rich, full. This is why being in the presence of someone who is deeply conscious can be transformative. Their stillness acts as a mirror, reflecting back to you your own depth. And this is also why your own presence has the power to change the world around you. You do not need to convince anyone of anything. You do not need to teach, to explain, to prove. When you are deeply present, others feel it. And in that feeling, something within them stirs. This is how consciousness spreads, not through force, not through argument, but through silent recognition. If you want to sense consciousness in another, begin by sensing it in yourself. Find moments of stillness throughout your day. Pay attention to the gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the silence behind all sound. The more you rest in this awareness, the more naturally you will recognize it in others. Even in those who seem completely lost in mind identification, you will see it. You will sense the light within them, even if they themselves are unaware of it. And this seeing is powerful. For when you see someone in this way, not as their conditioned self, but as the consciousness that lies beneath, it calls something forth in them. Even if they do not understand it, even if they cannot name it, something in them responds. This is the deepest form of love. To see another not as their story, not as their past, not as their personality, but as the formless presence that shines through it all. To live in this way is to move through the world with open eyes, open awareness. It is to meet each being not as an object, not as a role, but as a reflection of the same consciousness that you are. And when enough people begin to see in this way, something extraordinary happens. A shift subtle yet profound. A world where fear begins to dissolve, where separation fades, where connection is no longer based on surface-level identities, but on the silent recognition of what has always been present. This is not an idea. It is not a philosophy. It is something to be experienced directly. And when you experience it even once, even for a moment, you will understand. You will know, without doubt, that consciousness is not something we possess. It is what we are. And when we recognize it in another, we are simply recognizing ourselves. There is something beyond the surface of our existence, something deeper than thought, emotion, or even the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. It is the silent presence that pervades all things, the stillness beneath every movement, the awareness that observes without judgment. This presence is not confined to the self.